Hello, my name is Niamh Fitzpatrick from the Psychological Society of Ireland, and I'm going to talk to you today about grief in these times of COVID-19. And grief is what we feel when we experience a loss in our life, and COVID-19 brings loss into our life in many different ways. So there are life losses such as when a business has to close or a job is lost, and they bring loss of income, but also loss of structure, loss of routine, loss of purpose, and perhaps even loss of identity. There's also those physical losses that we have around the connection with loved ones. So family and friends who would usually have been in your life on a daily or a weekly basis. Now perhaps you can only see them remotely and connect with them remotely. And we can feel a huge sense of loneliness around that loss of connection that means so much to us in life. There's also the loss of life events that have changed because of coronavirus being in our midst. So weddings postponed, families who have not yet met, newborns who've come into the world maybe weeks ago, state exams cancelled, rites of passage from one phase in life to another phase in life just halted. And there can also really be a loss for the life that we had, a grief for the life that we had, a life with freedom, with movement, with choice, with connection, that none of which we have really right now in the same way. And we can grieve for that. COVID-19 also brings bereavement loss into our life. So sadly, in Ireland, as with other countries, we have had deaths due to COVID-19. And these are the people behind the numbers that we see each day on the updates on the news. And this virus brings additional layers to dying and death. So people have died alone without seeing loved ones in person for days or maybe weeks before their death, due to the fact of the need to isolate because of the virus. Families have had no chance to say goodbye to their loved ones. There's the absence of the rituals around death. So things like being able to hold a wake or to carry a coffin or to have the big funeral that allows a community to come in around those who are bereaved and offer support and comfort. We just don't have those at the moment. They're just not available to us because it's not safe to do so. And really then we have a situation that's just horrific. We have families grieving apart, people who are in the one family who are unable even to hug one another at the funeral of a loved one and who don't have the support of others around them either. So there's a huge isolation and cruelty to death anyway, but there's an added layer to that around death and dying now in this time of COVID-19. And also people who die because of conditions or situations other than COVID-19, those deaths are subject to the same restrictions around the rituals of death. So it's safe to say that coronavirus has brought into our midst a huge impact when it comes to loss and a huge impact therefore when it comes to grief. And grief is actually something that impacts us immensely anyway. Grief impacts us in every way, physically, emotionally, cognitively, socially, behaviorally. It can feel when you're grieving as if you're losing your mind. It can feel that you're turned inside out, that you're not yourself, that you're all over the place. And it's difficult anyway. Grief is a really difficult experience to go through. But there are layers around grief now and bereavement now that COVID-19 just make more difficult. And with grief, it's not about getting over it or moving on. It's not about closure. It's not about doing well. Grief is really about, certainly in the beginning, grief is about surviving. It's about surviving those early days and weeks and months after loss. And that surviving turns in time into learning to live with that loss. But that's not going to happen in stages. It's not linear. It's more an oscillation. It's more an ebb and flow. It's more a lurching from one set of emotions or physical feelings or cognitions to another. So it's moving maybe from, rage to loneliness to exhaustion to forgetfulness and back again multiple times. And in time though, we do learn to live with the loss. We do learn to accept the loss. We do learn to live with the loss in our life. And we know, for example, with bereavement loss, that when someone dies, It impacts every aspect of your life. Every corner of your life is impacted by the loss of this person you love. And what happens is, in time, we learn actually to grow our life around that grief. So it's not that the grief gets smaller, or it's not that the loss gets smaller. It's that we learn to grow our life around it, and that life that we have coexists with the grief, both in tandem in our lives. And so what can you do in these early days of grief, those early days of loss, to help yourself now? Well, the first thing you can realize is that although bereavement might look different in these times of COVID-19, grief actually doesn't care that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and the feelings around loss are going to come anyway. It won't care that the support systems that normally would be available to you aren't available in the same way. You're going to feel those feelings, and we need to understand that, hard as it is to even say that. Because when somebody dies, it's not that you loved them, it's that you love them. You still love your mum, or you love your dad, or your partner. You love whoever it is that's died. They're just not here to feel that love. It's that expression that grief is love with nowhere to go. And that holds whether we're in the middle of a pandemic or not. So what's really key, one of the first things that's really key, sort of subsequent to that, is that you have to feel the feelings. Whatever you feel now, you need to feel it. And it's about not masking those feelings, not denying those feelings, not running away from those feelings, not trying to numb them with substances. It's about feeling the feelings, even the ugly ones, even the rage, even the resentment, feeling those feelings. And it's about accepting that how you feel is normal in the face of loss, and approaching yourself with kindness and compassion around your feelings. No judgment, just kindness. The next thing that would be really important at this time would be to prioritize self-care. So grief is hard work. It's really hard work. And if you can mind your body so that your body can mind you, that's really going to help you. So that's around things like rest and sleep. And you may find that you're not able to sleep. So then maybe just think about rest. Just consider the concept of rest, and don't worry about the idea of sleep. It'll come when you're ready. It's about looking at things like hydration and nutrition, good nutrition. And you might say, well, I don't feel like eating. Well, but then it's about eating small pieces of good, nourishing food. Just understanding that you need to fuel your body so it can mind you at this time. And it's about things then like fresh air and gentle movement. And looking at those things to just see, can you help yourself have a strong body to help you during this time? That'll be very useful. Something else that's really important is to chunk things down into small, manageable pieces. It can be completely overwhelming to come to terms with the enormity of loss all at once. It can just be too much. And so that's something to bear in mind, to not do that, to just don't think about, in your head, trying to figure out how you're going to live your whole life without this person. Just look at today. Just look at this morning. Just look at time in terms of small chunks, and only deal with the chunk of time that's directly in front of you. Perhaps even saying to yourself that it's about now putting one foot in front of the other and repeating that. And that's all you need to worry about right now. Something else that's important is allowing for differences. So we live differently, we love differently, we grieve differently. And it's about understanding that others may not look like you do when you're grieving, or behave like you do when you're grieving, or sound like you do when you're grieving. But that doesn't mean that they're not grieving. So it's allowing each other. It's a live and let live approach when it comes to grief, and allowing each other to grieve in your own way. Something else that's important is remembering that children grieve too. But children's grief can look different to adult grief. So it might come as acting out, it might come as anger, but it's there, the losses they experience in their life. So maybe the life losses around their school, their friends, the life they had that they loved, which is now not possible. They can grieve for that. Or the bereavement losses in their life, if they've lost a parent, if they've lost a grandparent who has died at this time. It's important with children to be aware that they will grieve, and to be on the lookout, I suppose, watching out for it, so that you can be there as adults to support them. And speaking of support, the next thing that would be important for you is to gather support around you. We can't have that support in the same way right now, but it's about adapting and seeing how can you have that support in some way, because there are ways. So it's thinking about who has offered to help, and maybe what help have you not yet said yes to. You won't need all the help that you're offered, and some mightn't be useful, but it's maybe thinking about the possibility that there's somebody who's offered to help, and that could be something that might be of support to you now. And then it's about knowing that it's okay to tell those people what you need in terms of that help. So it's okay to say, well, actually, I'm okay for the moment, but in time when I'm ready, I would really love a chat. That would be really helpful. It's okay to say yes to the offers of practical help. So to say to somebody, well, actually, that would be wonderful if you could do my food shop. Thank you really very much for that. In terms of that support, I will also add in there to suggest that you check out the Irish Hospice Foundation. They're the national charity in Ireland around death and dying, and in their care and information hub they have some great resources around this time of COVID-19 and around death and dying and bereavement in this time, and that I highly suggest that you check that out. Something else that's important is to get professional help if needed. Grief is not an illness, and we don't need to pathologise it. And most people will find themselves, or certainly many people will find themselves, navigating the path of grief without needing some professional help. But in this time when the rituals of grief and around death are not available to us in the same way, you just might find yourself needing that person, that space to talk, somebody who's not your family or who's not your friends. And if you do, then look at either the Psychological Society of Ireland for qualified therapists, or similarly go to the Irish Hospice Foundation and look there to see who they have available as therapists to talk to you for some bereavement work. Some people might find, for example, they wouldn't want to do any one-to-one work, but they might like a support group, talking to other people who are walking in their shoes, who know what it's like to live their life. So just considering if you do need it, to get that help in that way. Also then lastly, for individuals who might be grieving now, I think it's important to know that you can survive this. As I said, grief is difficult. It's a really psychologically, physically, every way, it's a really difficult experience to go through. It's messy, it's ugly, it's tough on all levels, and it will challenge you and push you in ways that maybe you've never been challenged or pushed before. But it's really important to know that you can survive this, and that you can over time learn to live with the loss. And what happens in time is actually there comes a time when the good memories do feature more than the trauma of that loss. And you can live your life. It's a different life for sure. It's not the life that you asked for, but you're able to live that life. And you find that you're able to, say your loved one's name, and you're able to tell their story, and you're able maybe to bring some of their values along with you as you live your life. So I just want you to bear that in mind, that how you feel now isn't how you will always feel. I won't say necessarily that it gets better, but I absolutely would say that it gets different. So just hold on to that. And finally then, if you're supporting somebody who's grieving, again, I would suggest to check out the Irish Hospice Foundation, because they've lots of resources there and things that can really help you think about maybe how to remember somebody's loved ones. And then you can do things like post message of condolence on online sites. You can send cards. You could send notes or letters. If you knew the person who died, tell the person a story, the person that you know who's bereaved, a story about that person who died. Remember them in little ways. That is so helpful. Being able to say their name or hear a story about them is a huge help psychologically to somebody who's grieving. You could stand on your doorstep as the hearse goes by, just to pay respects to the dead and to support the bereaved. You can be there in whatever way that you can. You can watch a funeral online, for example. And really, it's about being there for somebody in whatever way you can, without pressure for that person to respond to the fact that you're there. Just being there gently, subtly, but there. And really, the most important thing on this is to realise, if you're supporting somebody who's grieving, that it's not about trying to fix their pain, because you can't fix their pain. They have to learn to live with that pain and to learn to live with that loss. And they will do that. Over time, we do that. As human beings, we're very good at doing that. But if you, as somebody who's supporting somebody who's grieving, could think of this expression, it would help and guide you in terms of what's good for you to do. And that expression is, when you cannot look on the bright side, I will sit with you in the dark. And if you can think with yourself about, how can I, if I have a friend or a family member who's bereaved and who's grieving now, how can I sit with them? Not necessarily physically, but emotionally. How can I have a presence there in their life if and when they need it? That would be a good guide. And lastly, I'll say, whatever your reason for clicking on this video of grief, if grief is a part of your life right now, then I wish you well and thank you for watching.